Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first ever Hex Invitational. Over the past 4 months, 12 players have earned their way to compete for their share of the $100,000 prize pool here in, well, a rainy Southern California this afternoon. We're going to be having just a lot of rounds of events over these next 2 days as they do go ahead and compete. My name is Crota, and I am joined alongside Dinotropia to bring you all of the action.
This is going to be quite exciting. Two powerhouse players here today. On the one side, we have Celandine, a well-known deck builder within the Hex community, as well as a feature on the Four Keeps competition. He does a lot of testing and deck building, actually, with me. On the other side of the table, we are going to have the Dark Knight Hex. Strong player, several top 8s in the IQs to his name. He was I think, a top 8 as well in the Blood Cup Season 3 top 5 Shards community tournament, as well as a contender, invitational to the Fate Cup in Season 2 last year.
Yeah. So as we're looking at what these players will be playing, what are some of the common decks that we can expect from the current meta here, as we have seen 3 sets of Hex so far?
Well, so there are a number of common ones that we have seen gracing the rounds, and you can go to Hex Meta and you can look up some of these for yourself to follow along if you're at home. But several ones we see typically are mono blood good stuff is sort of the common parlance. Typically control with some, well, vampires usually, but sometimes Finteo, sometimes Monsoon. Good, strong thing has been around since set 1, has just been continually built upon as we have gotten new releases. We also have seen Azure Cannon, focusing on damage, direct damage on Azure Fate, and then things like Tetsot's Champion Power, as well as Mesmeric Hypnoscientist to do one huge tempo burst and kill your opponent over a couple of turns. We've also seen, of course, the infamous Cressida Ramp, Ruby, Wild, lots of big, scary things coming down and killing people in the face. Those are the 3 big ones. We've seen some others that sort of float around the edges. Terror Mill has also been very popular. I think Metronomy went top 8 twice running a Terror Mill style of deck. This is where you use the interaction between Azure Fate and I think Sapphire Gem of Mischief, and Tarantulas for bury effects. So you put a bunch of Tarantulas into their deck, and then boom, if you get one of them, that becomes inspired. It takes another 10 cards off the top, and very quickly you can zero out an opponent's deck in a single turn.
Yeah, some of those decks are combo based, some of those decks are control based, trying to, get as much value out of a single card as possible. One card that one type of arch deck that we haven't seen a lot of, has been a lot of the aggro types of decks. For some reason, with Cressida being out there and Crocosaur being able to easily 2-for-1 on say even turn 3, a lot of players have kind of shied away from the typical, let me just get down to as many speedy guys, small guys, and push through that damage. So I think we are going to be looking at much more of the combo style, much more of the control, and a lot more of the interactive types of games. And those are the games that I really like to see. I like seeing longer games where you kind of try and figure out what your opponent is doing, as opposed to a game of solitaire where if you have the nuts, you have the nuts, and you're just able to kind of overrun your opponent. And are we having technical difficulties with the stream?
It looks like the stream is back up. So no, we're doing pretty well. But to comment on your second issue there, Crota, I tend to agree with you. I prefer slightly longer games. But for those aggro players out there, don't despair. We're currently in a situation where a combination of things, whether it's Carnosaurus and Vampire Princess and a lot of easy, cheap answers, has somewhat retarded the presence of aggro. But it was a fairly popular archetype in the beginning of Set 3, and likely we will see it return with Set 4.
Yeah, it's the evolution of the meta, and one of the things that is so great about a TCG is is that the game is constantly changing, even if cards are not being introduced. And when we talk about a meta, we're not talking about what is the quote unquote strongest deck. We're talking about what is the quote unquote the strongest deck right now. And there should always be a type of deck or a type of archetype that will be able to defeat that deck. And right now we're taking a look at a lot of the Carnosaurs and a lot of the ways to remove early threats early on while not giving up a lot of board control. The Carnosaur being the perfect answer. It is essentially for Wild a 2/2 troop that can hit the field and take down any one attack, two defense unit, and not lose any tempo whatsoever. So that's currently where we're at right now. If more cards get introduced, or if players start feeling as though the Carnosaur is not necessary in the reserve since aggro isn't that popular and it's pulled away, we may see an influx or a resurgence of the Carnosaur, or excuse me, the aggro types of decks coming back.
Eternal ebb and flow of the TCG. It looks like our players are going into their first round, getting notification from the judges that round number 1 is about to begin.
All right, a quick note, the one thing we did want to say that this is round 1 of a Swiss Constructor tournament. The 12 players will be playing 4 rounds regardless of how they do in this game here. And then from these 4 rounds, they will be taking the top 8 players to move on to the next round. It looks as though we're going to be looking at the Dark Knight running a Wild Sapphire Winter Moon deck, and we take a look at their hand, very, very strong. Meanwhile, Celandine going back to that Benvolio, very, very card draw, card happy type of deck, and he does have one Cerebral Fulmination. I'm sure he's also hoping to draw into perhaps a Psychotic Anarchist to continue that draw advantage.
Cerebral Fulmination into Mindpire is one of the sort of premier hands that you dream of, you want of, with a Mindpire deck. On the flip side, though, the Dark Knight playing Winter Moon does have counter magic as well as several time ripples. So, even if Celandine gets a couple of his key combo pieces down, the question will remain, how long will they stay on the board, and will they do enough before they start being answered by the Dark Knight's hand?
Yeah, we're taking a look at Winter Moon. Winter Moon's hand is also very action heavy. You can take a look. He has options at this point. It's Chlorophilia, very, very strong. Gets to pull an additional resource out. He also has 3 peaks, 2 time ripples, so that is a lot that he can do with there. Meanwhile, taking a look at Benvolio and Celandine's hand, it looks like he needs to draw a shard. He is going to be drawing 2 cards here, and it looks like he is going to luck out. He can place down the Ruby Shard, and this is an interesting spot. He could try and just start pushing through damage, put down the Mindpire, and then on the following turn, use Heart of Fire, use Scorch, use Crazed Rummaging, and because all of those cards will start doing damage, the Crazed Rummaging does cause your opponent to draw 3 cards, which then triggers the Mindpire, and I believe the Heart of Fire then gives you additional resources back to start playing, say, another Cerebral Fulmination.
Yep, it's a pretty great combo and one of the backbones of this deck. You can actually zero somebody out very quickly with the right hand.
All right, so right now taking a look at the Dark Knight, his options, it looks like he's going to be time rippling that, I believe, the Mindpire. Yes, it is going to be going back to hand. And now the follow-up question is, what does he want to do next? Also, take a note, he does have 2 very, very attractive actions in his discard, his Crypt there, that he can shuffle back into his deck and then get a little bit larger of a card advantage. He is going to be doing that with the Chlorophilia and the Time Ripple.
Yeah, Winter Moon's ability allows you to take things from your Crypt, put them into your deck, and it gives those cards, whatever they are, actions, troops, even shards, when you play this, draw a card. So it's one of the cool digital features of Hex, incremental card advantage. You can improve your deck over time, and through that improvement, slowly win the game.
All right, but card advantage may actually come back to haunt the Dark Knight here. You can see that the Dark Knight holding on to 7 cards right now, and he's going to have 11 cards before he really starts his turn. And at this point, you're starting to think to yourself as a Winter Moon, like, do I really need card advantage? What can I really do here? Yes, the Time Ripples can bounce back some Cerebral Fulminations, but is that going to help? Also, you can see that the Root Father is able to go back into your draw deck and does have reduced cost, but 7 resources doesn't seem that far away right now, especially with the hand that we're looking at right now.
If I were to toss anything, it might be a peak or two.
Or 3.
Or three, yeah. I mean, Dark Knight has the advantage over time because there's nothing currently on the board that will hurt the Dark Knight. So if he keeps counter magics, suffocates, interrupt effects, and resources open, he should be able to buy himself several turns. And indeed, we see resources up, nothing going. It is your move, Celandine, says the Dark Knight.
All right, and now we're at an interesting crossroads right now. You can see there's the Heart of Fire, and the Scorches are actually generate 1 additional resource if the Heart of Fire is in play. Also, and on the flip side of this, if his opponent decides to suffocate or counter magic the Heart of Fire, then he can easily play the Rage Fire that's in his hand or the corresponding Crazed Rummagines to try and thin out the effective cards that's currently sitting in the Dark Knight's hands.
So it looks like Dark Knight is going to let the Heart of Fire go through. Again, it's one of those does not actually hurt. It doesn't actually hurt him, right? It's only through combination do these cards start having a negative effect. And so you see the Scorch going down, but no extra resource generated. Celandine at 2 resources left and 8 cards in hand.
All right, so at this point, we know that he's going to play the Scorch just because he doesn't want to be sitting on 8 cards at the end of this turn, especially if you have a free card sitting in your hand. So it looks like the Rage Fire will be going down. A counter magic could be played, and I do think this is going to be a smart call coming in from the Dark Knight. It does increase the cost of subsequent Rage Fires in the deck, and now it looks like with 7 cards in hand, he is currently happy, and the Dark Knight now sitting on a very, very large hand, but he will be able to play one of the key cards in the Winter Moon deck, the Hunts. Forgot his name for a second.
Windsinger, Master of the Hunt. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Master of the Hunt, able to generate or get 6 resources at the start of every turn, not just your own.
Yeah, so it basically is eternal resource advantage, you might call it, as well as card advantage. Basically, any deck with a interrupt loves the Windsinger. You are always prepared, you are always ready, and your opponents are always weeping.
Yes, and I believe that the Windsinger does also have the option to allow you to draw more cards. I don't know how much the Dark Knight is actually going to take advantage of that. He's already drawing currently 4 cards a turn. He could technically draw up to 8 if he wants to, and now it looks like Celandine is going to be in trouble. With 6 resources and 8 cards in his opponent's hand, he has to believe his opponent is sitting on at least 1, if not more, counter magics.
Yeah, so when you suspect your opponent has a counter magic, typically you want to either bait something out so he will stop drawing into them. However, when you're playing Winter Moon and you have 3 Cerebral Fulminations, that's a slippery slope. He'll get to put more back in if he plays them, and it's very likely that he'll draw them. The second way to get around counter magic is to play 2 threats that need to be answered in the same turn. So basically, we call it baiting it out sometimes. Will he have the resources to do this before he has to start discarding key cards? Well, that's a critical question. He is sitting at 10 cards in hand.
Yeah, right now, he could try and go for the Crazed Rummaging. I mean, that is a low-cost card that does need to be kind of answered just because all of a sudden the counter magic may end up in the crypt anyways, just by sheer luck. All right, so we are going to see a counter magic onto the Heart of Fire. It does go straight to the crypt, and now all he can really hope for is using that Crazed Rummaging And what will happen next? I think a Craze Rummaging to try and bait a counter magic could have been a little bit of a safer bet, as we now see a little bit more card draw coming in from each side.
Yeah, unfortunately for Celandine, he did drop one of his Mind Pyres. I think that's probably the most critical card to have down against a Wintermoon deck, because every time the Wintermoon uses its own actions to draw cards, every time you play something that you brought back from the crypt and gave a cantrip effect, draw a card when you play this, that hurts you. That's one additional damage, that's one step closer to the grave. And so I think a key play here is going to be, can Celandine get the Mind Power out, and can he keep it out?
Yeah, so far we're looking at the Dark Knight's hand. We don't see that many, we don't see any time ripple stuff. We are going to be taking a look at a quick peek. He's going to be able to take a look at the top two cards of his draw deck and then choose one. It looks like he picked up another counter magic. And between the cards, we see three counter magics and one suffocate. How can one person have that much counter? Well, we can see he also does have 12 cards in hand. So this may actually turn into a straight up a straight up mill at this point, trying to bury your opponent, as he's already down to 32 cards. But we do see the Root Father come into play. And what can you tell what is the wild gem on that? Is that
Wild Gem is I believe, the minor gem of conservation, I believe it's called. It's Spell Shield. It gives the Root Father Spell Shield and then Flight as well. So two minor gems. Even though Arborean Root Father does have a major socket, you can put minor gems in there as well. And the Dark Knight is going for the big bad that can't be touched by anything but global effects.
Yeah, so with that, an 8/8 flyer spell shield, and if you weren't scared before from a 4/6, well, you got an 8/8 flyer on your tail now, as Celandine is going to be getting knocked down to 19 life after this swing here. And knowing Celandine's deck, what do you think he's looking for? What are Celandine's answers to this current board state?
Well, Celandine doesn't know about the counter magics, but he can probably guess. My suspicion would be if he gets a perfect confluence of a Crazed Rummaging that gets rid of the Dark Knight's counters, combined with maybe a Heart of Fire and some direct damage. That's the best way he can get out of this, because he basically has two more turns to do lethal to the Dark Knight before he dies himself. That is not a long time at all. So something needs to happen.
Yeah, it looks like the Crazed Rummaging is going to go down, and it will be counter magic. So unfortunately, that does mean that all subsequent Crazed Rummagings will cost a little bit more, but he was able to bait out one of those counter magics already. Wintermoon, however, notorious for shuffling counter magics back into a deck, as we may see a second counter magic being used as well.
Yeah, too many counter magics. This is the insidious thing about counter magic, because it increases the cost of all of your actions in any zone, whether that be the crypt, whether that's your deck, whether that's your hand. Soon, you don't even need to start countering things, because they stop becoming economical to play. You can see that the Crazed Rummaging is now, what, 5 resources for that effect? That's hardly worth it.
I believe he didn't counter the second Crazed Rummaging. I believe the Crazed Rummaging is still 3. So, and that's why we still see 2 counter magics in the Dark Knight's hand. But that is going to be a suffocate there, and very, very important to just make sure that, you know what, with one additional resource left, I'm not concerned about what else you have, and I'm just going to let you burden me for 2.
Definitely not looking good for Celandine. He's got to think of something quick.
Yeah, not quite sure what outs can really come out from Celandine, short of... I'm trying to think of what other possible outs that we've seen him seen in the past, or he could perhaps try and sideboard for game number 2, and knowing that his opponent is playing all of these very, very large drops. Those 8/8 flyers are extremely difficult to deal with, and now we see him shuffling back more counter magics and a suffocate into the deck, and that is just going to be a little bit more insult to injury there.
Well, the thing about Arborean Rootfather is they are actually almost impossible to deal with if you are mono Ruby. Spell Shield means it's only applied to global effects, and we currently only have a couple of global effects in the game. Case in point, I think we have Extinction as well as Purge. Those are the two that are immediately popping up in my mind. Without one of those two options, you simply can't get rid of an Arborean Rootfather.
Yeah, like the only other options that I can think of, only temporarily deal with them. You can use a menacing grog to try and exhaust. You can have a yesterday to bounce them back into your opponent's hand. Things of that nature where they're just temporary answers to a problem that is just going to continue to come back. And yes, we do see the eventual defeat, the GG right there, as Celandine now going to be traveling over to his reserve and looking for answers. And Heat Wave is not a good answer. Chaos Key is not a good answer. I don't see anything in his reserve that will really deal with what he has to face in game number two.
Winter Moon, I like to call them Winter Moon nope decks because they spend the entire time your opponent tries to say something and they go nope, and then they try to play something and they go nope. The key thing is to overwhelm the naysaying to say no, I will do this. Yes, we can play something and just get it down on the board. But to do that, you need pressure, and unfortunately, because of all that card draw, Celandine did not have it.
Yeah. I think Winter Moon. I think in this matchup, Winter Moon really wants to go up against a Benvolio or the type of deck that Celandine is currently running. Winter Moon has ways to use all of the cards that they're drawing. Normally, in the Benvolio style deck where you're drawing a lot of cards, your opponent doesn't have ways to really use the additional cards that are given to them, and that's where Benvolio really starts to shine. Winter Moon, especially with the Huntsman on the board, being able to get at least 6 additional resources on your opponent's turn to counter or play Epiphanies or do whatever sort of quick action goodness that can come its way, it really is really an unfavorable matchup here.
Well, to play devil's advocate, if Celandine, as Benvolio, gets to put down a Mind Pyre and it's not returned back with Time Ripple, because Time Ripple is really the only thing outside of Nature's Range, which I think we saw that being sideboarded in, that can get rid of an early Mind Pyre. If the Mind Pyre comes down, that's actually really deadly for a Winter Moon style deck, because there is so much card draw, and your entire deck is built around helping Celandine get you to draw more cards. A Mind Pyre or two down early, that can spell the end. I think it was really critical around turn 3 or 4 where you had all of those Time Ripples and the Mind Pyre came down, boom, came right back. Mind Pyre came down, boom, came right back, and then the countering began.
All right, so what we're gonna, if I'm hearing you correctly, what Celandine needs to do is get that Mind Pyre down, keep it down, somehow protect it, and make sure that the Dark Knight draws to his death as he's looking for options.
Yeah, that would be the ideal scenario in my mind for Celandine here, and he's well on his way. He's got the Mind Pyre in hand, and there's no possible way that the Dark Knight could counter it at this point in time. So perhaps Celandine will be able to turn this around in game number 2.
Yeah, it's going to be one of those things where he needs to draw into, he needs to draw into an out, and he is going to have twice as many opportunities to draw into an out, but he will also be taking twice as much damage from that Mind Pyre every turn than he normally would.
Oh, and speaking of outs, what is the very next draw but a Nature's Reigns? Good sideboard on the Dark Knight's part.
Yeah, Nature's Reigns, that card, it destroys an artifact or a constant. That Mind Pyre quickly straight into that crypt, never to be seen again. I don't believe Celandine has a way to reach into the crypt, unlike Winter Moon, and things are looking very much up and up for the Dark Knight.
Well, we'll see what gets drawn. If Celandine gets another Mind Pyre soon, I mean, he has Benvolio's power, allows him to draw into another card. That's definitely a possibility. We see him opting for Ragefire instead to kill that Carnosaurus.
And then gonna go ahead and follow up with that Psychotic Anarchist to swing for 2, draw an additional card, and most likely save that charge power for another turn. He doesn't I'm not sure what he's looking for, but he does end up drawing into a burn there, and we'll see what the Dark Knight is able to draw into. He does get into an arcane focus, but more importantly, he has a verdict, and the verdict is one of those counters that will stop Mind Pyre before it is even played. We'll see if the Dark Knight purposely leaves behind at least two resources.
Oh, it is looking rough for Celandine. We have Nature's Reigns in hand on the Dark Knight side, Verdict, and two counter magics. Just as I said before, a hand full of nope.
Yeah, in addition to the time ripple as well, just in case some sort of troop is able to hit the board, Cardosaurus quickly exchanges himself for the Psychotic Anarchist, as we're going to be looking at once more the Dark Knight discarding a card. He was up to 8 cards, now going down to 7 as we move on into turn number 5. Benvolio using that charge power. What is he going to draw? Is he going to draw something useful? Crackling Bolt quickly uses it just because he would have to discard it at the end of turn anyways. And at this point, does he just want to try and burn his opponent as much as he can while he has the opportunity, while his opponent doesn't have any resources free to do a counter?
And it's a use or lose it kind of situation, and that includes not only Benvolio's power, but also the counter magics. I mean, use them when your opponent has no resources up. It's the only safe time, unless you're baiting something out. And as the Dark Knight gets more and more resources to his name, he can keep more and more resources open every turn. That's where the danger really begins.
Yeah, that's definitely in that situation. Also, once the 6-drop 4/6 replenish your opponent's resources hits the table as well, you pretty much have no way to answer any of the nopes that the Winter Moon does plan on playing on you. It looks as though the Nature's Reign targeting the Chaos Key, making sure the Chaos Key is unable to void anything on his opponent's side of the board. But even though the Dark Knight is in a controlling portion of this game, he doesn't have any real way to put pressure on Benvolio and Celandine right now. There's no way to deal damage. All he can say is, I'm going to deny you until at least I have some sort of play, maybe in turn 7 when I'm finally able to drop a Root Father down.
Yeah, Winter Moon is usually goes for the long game. It's all about improving your deck so that anything your opponent plays becomes worse because of counter magics, because of your interrupts, because of your time ripples. Like your opponent just has to spend every single one of their turns simply replaying their threats. Plus, over time, your answers to their threats, as well as some of your large, difficult to answer threats on your own, things like Arborean Rootfather, things like Crocosaur. A typical Winter Moon deck will only run maybe one or two of their major, threat cards, but they don't need to run more than that. They can bring them back and continue to use them over time.
Yeah, definitely true. Also, in addition to bringing them back, they also have so many ways of at least drawing into them. If we get a chance to take a look at the Dark Knight's Winter Moon deck in between rounds, we'll probably see he doesn't need to run 4 Root Fathers, maybe 3 or even just 2. He's probably running 2 of the the winter, the 6-drop 4/6 that.
Yes, Windsinger, Master of the Hunt.
Yeah, Windsinger, Master of the Hunt. He doesn't need to have that many troops. And in a normal Winter Moon deck, how many troops do you think are in that deck?
It's typically not very many. You'll see sometimes Carnosaurus, 2 to 3 is usually in the deck list. Sometimes you can get 4 if you're really afraid of aggro. Crocosaur, usually hovering around 2 to 3. Arborean Rootfather, I've seen 1, I've seen 2 in the deck list. It really depends a little bit on how troop versus nope your opponent wants to be, how many questions, how many answers. But typically speaking, we're below 10 troops in a Winter Moon style deck. The rest of it is just pure misery.
Yeah, it's the rest of it is just going to be all of those nopes, and with 7 resources, finally, it looks like that 7/7 flyer spell shield will finally hit the board, and Celandine not having any answers is going to be up against the clock. It is most likely going to hit the board here. I don't see any reason why his opponent not play it.
No play. He's got to keep those counter magics up. I think the worst thing that could happen is he's got 13 health, right? It's low. Versus
Yes.
8 resources. A couple burns to the ground, unanswered, you're going to lose, even if you play the Arborean Root Father in 2 to 3 turns, if you do not keep your resources open for those counters. I actually think that was a very clever play on the Dark Knight's side. He knows he is walking a fine line between healthy and dead.
All right, so and as we said, this is the style of deck that Winter Moon is. It is definitely late game, and even though he could try to put his opponent up on the clock, I'm not sure if he's worried about the burn to the grounds. Perhaps maybe Rage Fires would be an even bigger target, where if his opponent happens to be sitting on 3 Rage Fires, 6 resources could potentially deal 4, 8, or what, 2, 4, 6 damage,
Yeah,
which would bring him
it
down to
starts
one.
with 2, then 4, then 6. Yep.
So yeah, that would put him down to one, and if he draws a Scorch Burn, that would be the end of it. So yeah, Winter Moon purposely, or Dark Knight purposely, looking for one specific card. I gotta believe, and plays down a Wild, which I would have suspected the Sapphire instead for a deeper peek, as we're looking at what he hopes to do next.
Well, I mean, so there's some question, right? He's hoping to get enough resources to play his threats and also have counter magics up. You know, just because that's the thing. Keep your nopes. Say anything you play, I will answer.
All right, and it looks like the Crocosaur is going to get hit with a very, very red Ruby Lance, dealing 9 damage to that Crocosaur. It does get pushed back here, and right now the Dark Knight is perhaps in the weakest position we've seen in this game. He only has answers to one. He'll only have the option to counter one thing right now. So here's the question: what do you do, and in what order do you do it?
This is pretty critical. You are correct. Playing the Psychotic Anarchist first is a serious threat. He's got to either counter that or take 2. 2 is not lethal. So, again, you see Dark Knight holding back here. But Mind Pyre kills over time. Burn to the ground kills in just a couple of turns. It depends on how much pressure Celandine feels. If he thinks he can kind of take his time and bait things out, well, now would be the time to do it.
Yeah, and he did end up drawing into an additional Mind Pyre, so if he wanted to, he could purposely play back-to-back Mind Pyres, knowing that his opponent would at least be taking 2 more damage next turn, and it looks like he's going to be assigning a value of 4, so that if it is countered, he will be able to play a Mind Pyre, and I like this play. The counter magic will go onto the burn to the ground, keeping Mind Pyre's cost at 3.
Yeah, this is actually really critical. The Arborean Root Father or some other blocker needs to come down to prevent any extra damage from that 2/2 here, because he's at 9. That's so very close to being dead.
Yes, but as you say, when you need to draw answers, if your opponent has a Psychotic Anarchist and Cerebral Fulmination, you are in a fairly decent spot here. So the Carnosaur will go ahead and do that trade. We will see a little bit of life regen just because a troop did end up battling. And now comes the questions on how much Nope can the Winter Moon deck really get, especially with the Huntsman on the board, being able to draw 2 additional cards during your opponent's turn.
Well, but can he draw those cards? Can he afford to draw those cards? Mind Pyre is down. This is really risky, right?
That it is really risky, and I'm surprised that he didn't peek at the end of his turn. He knows that he's going to get those resources back, and digging 5 cards, he could have easily found a Time Ripple and bounced the Mind Pyre during his opponent's turn, and then responded by drawing.
Well, I mean, peak doesn't count as being drawn, right? It's
Yeah,
crucially not a draw effect, so he could do it without taking damage. That is important to recognize.
yeah.
But I mean, Celandine has a lot of advantage here between the burn to the grounds, the Mind Pyres, and a second Cerebral Fulmination.
Oh, that second Cerebral Fulmination, it looks as though it was drawn off of the Benvolio text. hence the extra little bit of text right there. What is going to happen? The burn to the ground does cost 3x, so he's going to go ahead and attempt to burn for 6. It is going to immediately be countered just because the Huntsman needs to stay in play, and at this point, that burn to the ground really loses its effectiveness.
Okay, well, let's think about this. Dark Knight has 11 health currently. He's taking 3 damage a turn from the Mind Pyre. This gives him 4 turns to survive, assuming he doesn't draw some other or find some answers. Right? He's only got a limited amount of turns to really keep this to keep this position down. However, Time Ripple is a thing, and he has not one but 2. One coming down on the Mind Pyre, and others in hand. This is actually pretty rough.
Yeah, I think the Dark Knight just has too many options to draw, even though he was taking damage. And I expected him to use that peak just a little bit earlier, bounce that Mind Pyre back, but it looks like things are once again going to be on the up. You see the 7-drop Root Father hit the field. It is an 8/8 flyer with Spell Shield, and all of those resources will be reset at the start of the turn, and he could also draw off of the hunter in order to hopefully get an additional counter magic as well.
Yeah, I mean, between Time Ripple and Counter Magic, 2 Time Ripples, in fact, any Mind Pyre that is played will probably not stay on the board for very long. Celandine is going to need a lot more threats to deal with the Dark Knight's hand.
Yeah, right now Celandine, even if he tries to play a Mind Pyre, it looks like the Verdict of the Ancient Kings will stop one. A counter magic can easily stop the other. I don't think the Time Ripples will even come into play at this point. A third Cerebral Fulmination hitting the board. I don't think the Dark Knight will stop that at all. Anarchist is going to hit the board. That's going to be free and clear since there are two blockers. Mind Pyre, counter magic going to be coming underway. Oh, did he allowed it?
Yeah, he did allow it, but that's, I think, largely because it doesn't matter. He has Time Ripple, so it comes down, sees what else he's trying to bait out, can use one of his just plentiful, bountiful interrupts, and then he can Time Ripple, I think at the end of turn, is highly likely.
Yeah, a little bit of a miscue there. That Verdict of the Ancient Kings actually had the draw effect, so he did take 1 point of damage on himself there. So if you didn't see the slight animation, the slight shake on that Mind Pyre dealing that 1 point of damage, Time Ripple now finally being bounced back into the hand.
All right, not 1, but 2, also returning that Psychotic Anarchist. So we are going to see she's 14 damage incoming next turn.
All right, he can also peek, try and perhaps pick up another thing. We can see Sapper's Charge is in the hand. Sapper's Charge, essentially for three resources, you can deal 2 damage if he somehow draws into another card there. But things are looking very much up and up for the Dark Knight. He has a lot of the answers that he needs, and he has plenty of outs just in case another Mind Pyre does go down.
Let's see, does he have lethal with Sappers? No, because he's doing 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. He's 1 away from lethal, even if he does play both of his Sappers Charge. So Celandine does have 1 more turn to try and get out of this. The question is, can he possibly draw into anything that can overcome not 1, not 2, but 3 counter magics and 13 resources on the Dark Knight's side?
Yeah, if you 3 counter magics and the 13 resources, that's going to be absolutely plenty. The Carnosaur going to hit the field as well. I don't believe you can have it purposely battle your own troop just to gain life. So
no, I believe it's an opposing troop.
Yeah, I believe it's an opposing troop as well. We can take a look at what's going on here. Drawing a lot of cards. Another burn to the ground, but you got to remember, I believe it was counter magicked twice, so that is a 5x ability. All he would be able to do is 8 damage. There's a Crackling Bolt, and the counter magic will be used here, increasing the cost back up to 4. And I don't believe Celandine has any real way of dealing any damage just because the cost of each of those cards are so high now.
Yeah, I mean, Mind Pirate 5, as you mentioned, burned to the ground 6x, so he could do at most, what was it, 4 damage, something along those lines. 1 damage with the burn. It's just, yeah, so 5 cost instead of 6, my mistake. But it's the same, it's more or less the same difference. He's in a bad spot.
Yeah, short of a catastrophic mistake by the Dark Knight there, Dark Knight will be able to go 2-0 and move on to the next round with 1 win underneath his belt. And congrats to him. He's this much closer to making his way into the top 8 and the Swiss draft that is going to separate the final top 4. So hats off to the Dark Knight there, taking a very cold and calculated game, just playing that Winter Moon deck, knowing when to hold back, knowing, you know what, although I can play the Root Father, it's best if I answer anything that he throws at me instead.
Yeah, very, very careful play, I think, on both sides of the field. And remember, it is anyone's game. First round of the Swiss, you just need to make the top 8, and if you make the top 8, then you go into the drafting portion. So we will see if Celandine's performance improves moving forward.
All right, so as we wait up for the final games to finish up in this round, please stay tuned. Come back here shortly. It should be at most 20 minutes before we will be looking at round 2 of the Invitational here in Southern California.
You've been watching Crota and Dinotropia. We will see you right after this.